Welcome to FinScale, a podcast created by Solen Niederkorn, shedding light on innovation in finance, banking, and insurance.
Navigating financial innovation with Simon Taylor and spotlight on Sardine's achievements. Simon Taylor, Head of Strategy and Content at Sardine.
Sardine's sort of halfway between the two. We are one API, but we're much more opinionated. We feel like one product. We go much deeper into some of the largest partners in the world. So we have a partnership with Refinitiv. We have a partnership with Experian. We have a partnership with Visa. We have partnerships with some of the largest data providers in the world. Early warning services in the United States is one of the largest consortia. Incredibly difficult for people to get access to from a compliance standpoint if you're in FinTech. But Sardine has that, and we've built a deep integration with it. So our growth is about collecting more data, building out the product, pushing further into generative AI, and servicing the demand we have in front of us.
This week, I invite you to explore a multitude of topics with my guest, the unmissable Simon Taylor. He generously shares insight on the future of the financial industry and emerging fintech categories like embedded finance, which he believes are true game changers for the finance world. We also discuss his journey from his years in banking to founding 11FS. What intrigued me the most during our discussion is Sardine, the RegTech, where he leads strategy and content. It's evident that the team excels in AI and fraud-related areas. Additionally, you'll discover their cutting-edge solution designed to truly solve pain points for players across the entire industry. It's worth noting that the likes of Refinitiv are already working with them. We also delve into their ambitions, recent fundraising efforts, and explore practical use cases. Enjoy the show! Hello, everyone. Hello, Simon.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have you on my podcast, and I would like to thank you immensely for your availability. I've had in mind to invite you to FinScale for quite some time, and it was fortunate that I met you at Money 2020. And yes, thank you again for accepting my invitation. Simon, I guess many people know you in the audience, but can you please remind us who you are, what you do, and your story a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So, hello, everybody. Simon Taylor. I have been in financial services for about 15 years. Worked at TSYS, the payments processor. So I have a payments background in a variety of roles. I was at Barclays, where I did a lot of work around payments change and mobile delivery, lots of hands-on experience in banking. I was then on the founding team of Barclays Rise, which is its partnership initially with Techstars and how it works with startups. Then was head of crypto R&D at Barclays before leaving to co-found a little company called 11FS. Listeners may be familiar with the FinTech Insider podcast, and was there for 6 years. Over the last 12, 18 months, I've been working for a company called Sardine. Sardine is the world's best fraud team that you hire as an API. And so we're excited to work with some amazing companies to stop scams. I also run a blog called FinTech Brain Food, where I cover my thoughts of the industry just in a full-on, unfiltered way. So excited to be here and excited to share more with the audience.
Yeah, great. I love Brain Food. You publish every Sunday.
Correct. Yeah.
So invite all the auditor to subscribe.
Yeah, fintechbrainfood.com if you want to check it out. Thank you, everybody.
I'll add the link on my newsletter. Okay, just a few words because I wanted to concentrate with you on Sardines more particularly, but I think it would be interesting and for the audience that you take just 5 minutes to go back to your 11FS experience and explain to us why you launched it and what inspired you and what inspired the creation of 11FS in the first place.
Yeah, so it was actually a conversation I had with the CEO, David Breer, who called me one day and he asked me a very simple question, which was, have you heard of challenger banks? I said, yes, of course I've heard of challenger banks. He said, what about challenger consultancies? I said, ooh, what's that? He said, I don't fully know. Do you want to come help me figure it out? "Oh, and by the way, you should meet this guy called Jason." And I said, "Who's Jason?" And he said, "Well, Jason was one of the co-founders of both Starling and Monzo, and he has an appetite for building lots of new digital banks and products. And so we think 11FS could be the vehicle to build lots of new digital apps and products." So simply put, in our early days at 11FS, the goal was to build digital banks. But we knew in order to do that, we were going to have to punch massively above our weight, because who was going to be wanting that work was every other big consultancy. And every other big consultancy and strategy house in the world had all of the consultants in all of the banks. They had hundreds of thousands of employees. So we needed a way to get attention. And one of the ways of doing that was by launching a podcast. So the podcast was called FinTech Insider. And I think it was a couple of conversations that we had. I think David had one in the back of a car with a guy from DBS, whose name escapes me, Neil. It was Neil from DBS at the time. And then we had another conversation with the guys, with Marco Wenthin and a few of the guys from the early days of Solaris in a pub in London. And the conversations were so good. They were so good that we thought, we should record this. We should just take this and put a microphone here. And I think people would listen to it. And then it came the question of, well, what should the format be? And Jason had the concept that, well, if you've ever watched the television program Top Gear in the UK, the original cast and crew, it wasn't a show about cars. It was a show about people who love cars. And, they had guests and they had news, but they had fun features. And it's a bit of a variety show about people who love cars. And that's kind of the genesis of FinTech Insider. I always talked about it as being FinTech with a 2-drink minimum. It's very relaxed. It's always a cast of characters. It's always with a sense of enthusiasm for the industry, hope, optimism, but also a bit provocative. We'll say the hard thing. And I think that created a sense of authenticity and trust. The thing I still observe about, especially a lot of financial institutions, but even inside FinTech companies, when you have a job, you kind of have to pull your punches. You can't overly criticize the department next to you or the person next to you. You can't always say what you really think, because you have to work with that person next week or next month. But somebody on a podcast can say whatever the heck they want without consequences.
Yeah.
Now, if I was in front of that person, I would be as honest as I can be, and I would try and help them. But you've got to call out criticism and you've got to not. So that authenticity, I think, drove a lot of attention to 11FS. And it was able to, grow several lines of business. So yes, it helped build the early days of Metal with NatWest, and has helped build, I think, at least 10 different digital banks around the world, and continues to do so. FinTech Insider became the #1 FinTech podcast globally. And it also has 11FS Pulse, which I still think is the best kept secret about 11FS, which is a digital platform to see behind the login screen of FinTech applications and crypto applications, wealth management, insurance, and more. So imagine if you wanted to sign up for every FinTech app and every banking app in the world. You would probably ruin your credit score. So how do you see behind the login screen? How do you see that new feature that Robinhood just launched in the United States? How do you see that new feature that Alipay just launched in China? Where's the platform you go to see that video? Because seeing is believing. And that's 11FS Pulse. And it's an amazing product. And the team at Monzo absolutely loved it when we first showed it to them. And frankly, a lot of the biggest banks in the world, product teams continue to love it. I still believe this should be the first place you look whenever you design a product. So that's 11FS, and I had a great time there for 6 years, genuinely. So was excited to be involved.
How long have you been staying at 11FS?
Yeah, it was about 6 years, just over 6 years. It was a good chunk of time, more than half a decade.
Okay, so you've seen a lot of use cases and you've worked on a lot of new use cases, business cases. In your opinion, which one do you find the most impactful in the banking industry and why? Is there one specifically you can mention?
So there's most impactful to who? I think the low-hanging fruit opportunity that is still there in order would be number one, embedded finance, especially in Europe. Nobody has got their act together really on embedded finance. And I think Europe is such a balkanized market. That France is so different to Germany, which is so different to the Dutch, to the rest of the Dutch region, to the Scandinavia, to the UK, to Southern Europe. That it's very, very hard to go pan-European and generate scale, which a lot of the platforms in the United States have been able to do. There's also generally concentrated banking markets. And it's a little bit harder from a regulatory perspective to deliver on the opportunity. But it is a massive opportunity because, frankly, finance is just far more engaging when it shows up at the point of need in context. Mm-hmm. Finance always used to be a destination. I will go to the branch. I will download the mobile banking app. Mm-hmm. But finance is much better when it shows up at the checkout as a buy now, pay later button. Finance is much better when I'm using some software like accounting and I can hit the pay button directly there. Mm-hmm. Finance needs to become more invisible. And embedded finance is the way you do that. Banks and financial institutions, share prices are suffering despite interest rates being high. FinTech companies are not necessarily getting their funding rounds that they used to. This is leading to point number two, and opportunity number two is partnerships. Yeah. We need more partnerships. Mm-mm. There are now fintech companies that could be great partners to the banks, and banks could be great partners to fintech companies, but they're so bad at it in both directions. It's something we've got to get better at. So embedded finance, number one, and then number two would be partnerships. And I think embedded finance is going to mature as well. It used to be that embedded finance meant, a debit card with a different logo on it. I think now it's much broader than that. It's different types of lending. It's different types of embedded insurance. Mm-hmm. It's wrapping that product around a consumer. It's getting better data from open banking. Mm-hmm. It's putting the story together for a customer in a way that's really contextually relevant to wherever they are. Just as one example, there's a company who's a Sardine client called Buildertrend. Buildertrend is a platform for anybody who is trying to put together construction projects. Mm-hmm. Let's say I'm building a row of houses. Let's say I'm building a shopping center. Let's say I'm building any kind of real estate. The project management software I'm going to use has to be able to cope with different suppliers, parts, labor, contractors, all kinds of complexity. Yeah. And that project management software, by default, it should also be able to manage the project costs, and it should also be able to manage the payments, and it should also be able to manage any lending that you need through that platform. Mm-hmm. It just makes sense that you do it there. So I think that's the biggest opportunity.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm mentoring students at HEC in France, and the platform you describe is exactly the pitch I received from the last team I mentored. Okay, last question, and then we'll move forward with Sardine. Across all the different contacts you've had with as an employee in the banking industry, and then serving bank clients afterwards at 11FS, how, in your opinion, has this industry transformed over the past few years? And do you think it's just the beginning? Because in my opinion, it's so slow. I'm not always impressed by the dynamic. What's your opinion on this?
Yeah. I see most big banks, most incumbents generally, are in denial about the fact that their market share is eroding. The problem with erosion is if you go look at the Colorado Rocky Mountains, they're a little bit smaller this year than they were last year, and they'll be a little bit smaller next year than they were this year. Erosion happens kind of gradually, Mountains don't vanish, they erode. And that's what's happening to the big banks. But you can really see this in the pressure on the market cap of financial institutions. The lack of dynamic is really showing in, despite the fact that rates are much, much higher, and profits are absolutely fantastic in this little Goldilocks period that financial institutions find themselves in. The market isn't rewarding that growth in profit because they're not seeing the revenue growth. And so if you are profitable, but you're staying profitable by gradually giving up unprofitable segments of your business and sort of giving up growth and just growing revenue by 4 to 6% a year, then you're underperforming the Nasdaq. You're underperforming the S&P. Mm-hmm. You are an eroding asset, and your job as a CEO is to not be that anymore. And so that is, I think, a fundamental failing, is the acceptance of, oh, well, we're big. Oh, well, we've still got transaction banking. Oh, well, oh, well, oh, well. Mm-hmm. And to be fair, I speak to many CEOs and executive leaderships who have the opposite mindset. It's like, how do we actually get this organization moving and growing? How do we do it? And I think there's a whole conversation to be had around, you're going to have to get braver. You're going to have to, go into wartime mode and start actually delivering here, because more of the same is not an option here. Mm-hmm. You need that sense of urgency really rapidly. And I think I do speak to CEOs and presidents who get that. Because if you look now at the digital banks, I mean, the classic example is Nubank, but even the Starlings and the Monzos, and I think we'll start to see many others across Europe and especially in Asia Pacific, profitability is already coming to them, but their revenue growth is astonishing. If you go look at in the public markets, there's something called Rule of 40 growth. Rule of 40 says if you combine profitability with revenue growth, the numbers should add up to more than 40. Mm-hmm. So companies like SoFi in the United States hit that, dLocal, Mercado Libre, but also companies like Wise. And it's so interesting to see Wise partner with Swift. Mm-hmm. If you speak to any banker, you will pretty much get the answer that Revolut and Wise took their entire cross-border business from consumers and small business. Mm-hmm. It's just gone. That revenue line is gone, and it's not coming back. Yeah. So what other revenue lines are going to go? And are you just going to accept that? Or are you going to get onto a wartime footing? Are you going to start partnering with fintech companies and figuring out what your strength is and where you have a right to win?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Thank you. So now if we talk about Sardine, can you please provide an overview of what you do at Sardine and yes, a bit, some details about your geographical presence, figures, team, etc. So we have an idea of the company.
Yeah, so Sardine is about 100 people based remote. So we have teams in Japan, we have teams in Europe, we have teams in the United States, about most of them based in the US. Series B company raised more than $75 million and recent Horowitz backed. Companies like Brex, Coinbase, Stearns Bank, but also now increasingly some of the largest e-commerce merchants and some large financial institutions who I can't name, unfortunately, but trust me, they're big. So essentially, Sardine is the world's most modern fraud and compliance platform. And the story comes that it was really built by fraud and compliance people for fraud and compliance people. So the CEO, Subs Ranjan, was a double PhD in data science. He built the early part of his career building bot detection for Yelp. So in the advertising world, bots can really ruin your revenue by clicking on ads and messing with your whole ad targeting space. Mm-hmm. He was brought into Coinbase to solve the biggest problem Coinbase had in 2014-15, which was fraud and scams. And when he was brought in there, he had a small fraud operations team. And with that small fraud operations team, he now had to figure out, how do you solve not just fraud in the crypto world, but fraud and compliance in the world of financial institutions and the regulated finance. Because when you're an exchange, you have 2 times the risk. It's the risk on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
But what he noticed is none of the tools worked. All of the vendors and all of the platforms were black boxes. They wouldn't give him data. All of the tools and all of the vendors would just give him a score. And he's a data science guy. He's like, give me the data. I want to train my own models.
Mm-hmm.
And so that became increasingly frustrating for him. He then spent the next sort of 4 or 5 years at Coinbase building out a sort of in-house bespoke team that did this incredibly well, and sort of moved on in 2019 to Revolut to go and do the same again. And nearly 5 years later, he finds the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
None of the vendors are up to the job. He has to go to 30 different providers to pull all of the data together. He has to pull in open banking data from crypto. Why can't somebody do this? So instead, he decides to just leave and go build it himself. So that's Sardine. It's the data-driven fraud and compliance API. So for some clients, Sardine is the entire fraud and compliance stack. And for some clients, Sardine just provides a piece of it. But what makes us special is that we can detect scams before they happen.
Mm. Okay.
If you're familiar with authorized push payment fraud,
mm-hmm.
This is when somebody tricks you into believing that either a family member is in trouble or there's a great investment opportunity, something along these lines. And what this will do is get you to log into your bank account and send some money. Now, once you've sent that money, it's gone. And you're never getting it back.
Yeah.
And so what Sardine's able to do is look at specific device and behavior information about both your device and the scammer's device and potentially the previous history of that device. So if you are on the phone with a scammer, if you've received a text message from them, if you've received an email from them, Sardine would look at that data and flag that as high risk. And what that would allow the Sardine client to do is potentially hold that payment or block that payment to prevent the scam from happening in the first place. Mm. So we do lots more besides that. But really, I think in this time when fraud and scams are absolutely exploding, getting more data, getting more sophisticated data, not being a black box, allows us to do much more. And allows us to prevent scams before they happen.
So you're not concentrating only on crypto businesses. You're covering also FinTech. Who are your main target clients?
90% of our clients are non-crypto. The thing you'll find with Sardine, with fraud and compliance generally, is crypto is usually implicated in most transactions. So if, let's say, you get a phishing email lands in your inbox and it claims to be about an Amazon refund. Oh, you've paid £768, but it looked like fraud. Would you like a refund? And then you click some link and it's not actually a refund. Mm-hmm. And then you end up having to go into some crypto rabbit hole. This happens more often than you would believe. These scams are incredibly prevalent. That happens on crypto, but it ends up with Amazon getting called about a fraud thing that's happened or a bank getting called about somebody being defrauded. So you can't untangle crypto or any other payments type. They're all connected. So Sardine happens to be very, very good at looking at that space. But that gives us a bit of an advantage for any type of fraud and any type of compliance, because you can see it whether you're in a bank, whether you're in e-commerce, no matter what sector you're in, you're going to see that sector. Mm-hmm. But we also look at the device, the behavior, we look at open banking, we look at emails, we look at the history of the mobile number. So we have an awful lot of data that can help us make a meaningful difference to people.
Impressive. So you already answered most of my questions. I was interested to know maybe more into details, given all the regulatory constraints that we see on fintech and crypto businesses, how you position yourself and how you organize yourself to still offer very innovative solutions while supporting your clients to fulfill their regulatory obligations, but also to offer products that are regulatory proofed.
So, interestingly, we are more of a paracetamol to that headache of compliance than anything. We sort of, we're the painkiller. We can ensure that financial institutions meet their regulatory obligations, but also improve their conversion. So the problem, fraud and compliance have two different challenges, but they're essentially the same problem. So in fraud, I'm always trying to trade off how many false positives happen. So if you go to make a transaction, the transaction may or may not happen because the bank might think, oh, this is a fraudster, I'm going to decline this transaction. We call that a false positive if you are in fact not a fraudster. Mm-hmm. So that's lost revenue for the bank, it's lost revenue for e-commerce, that harms their conversion. So on one side, if your fraud controls are too tight, then you'll harm your conversion. On the other side, if your fraud controls are not tight enough, then you'll lose trust, you'll lose money. There's the direct fraud losses. You'll have customers complaining. You'll also start to see that other financial institutions, e-commerce merchants start blocking your card. So your conversion goes down anyway. So fraud versus conversion is this classic trade-off. And the way you deal with that is with better data. So the tools and the incumbent vendors that solve this problem really haven't had to do much research and development in the past decade. But the fraudsters have done plenty of research and development. Mm-hmm. They've been developing new scams. They've been getting deeper into crypto. So there's a lot more fraud, and the traditional fraud tools are harming conversion. So for a fraud team, we can improve your conversion and we can reduce your fraud losses. So that's sort of one space where we can make a meaningful business case impact. The second side is around the anti-money laundering. So let's take any sort of money laundering typology like money mules. Mm-hmm. So a money mule is somebody who is taking stolen funds or the proceeds of crime and moving it around the financial system to hide it from law enforcement, to hide it from banks, and to make it look legitimate. So this is a person who will open a bank account, they'll receive some money, and they'll send it to somebody else, and they're getting paid. These people are often, being intimidated, or they may be suffering in some of their own way, or they might just be doing it to make a little bit of money themselves. Money mule activity is the type of thing that a financial institution or anybody who's regulated can receive a massive fine for. Mm-hmm. If a criminal gang is doing that, or if the money mule is doing it on behalf of a state that is subject to sanctions, that can result in fines that total in the billions. I mean, BNP Paribas was fined more than $12 billion. We've seen fines go much higher than that for anti-money laundering breaches. So this is existential for a financial institution. They have to get this stuff right. And so they have a series of systems already, often internally, that do transaction monitoring, and they will do investigations, and they will try and pull all of that together. But historically, fraud and anti-money laundering, fraud and compliance existed in silos. Mm-hmm. They were two different worlds. Mm-hmm. But what starts out as fraud often turns into money laundering. And so you need all of the data to put this big picture together in real time. So that's one of the things we do at Sardine is we can actually put together what turns out to be a crime ring. We can spot all of the individual small bits of fraud that were coming earlier on, because not only do we see what's happening in one financial institution, we see what's happening in all of our clients. Not only do we see what's happening in all of our clients, we can use open banking, we can use telco, we can use emails, we can use the entire crypto network, to pull together a much richer picture of what is happening with this criminal gang and criminal money laundering risk. So we really do help financial institutions meet their compliance obligations in much more sophisticated ways. As the fraudsters and as the criminals are getting more sophisticated, we need to battle them with AI, and that's what Sardine AI is really all about.
And you don't need to be regulated to perform and offer your services as a service provider?
You don't need to be regulated to use our software. No, you can absolutely use it if you're not regulated, but typically we find organizations that are performing regulated activities get the most benefit from it.
Yeah, but I was thinking Sardine, do you need to be regulated as a service provider?
No, we provide software. I mean, we do have money transmission licenses and an ENG license because a part of our business is able to move money. Mm-hmm. So we do happen to have those regulations. We do have an in-house compliance team. Mm-hmm. And so we have a money laundering reporting officer in-house, and we ensure we meet all of those obligations. But there is no requirement for that from the vast majority of the software that we have.
Great. One last question, because we're a bit running out of time, and I promise it won't last too much. So you said you performed a Series B with quite an impressive funding round. You said 75 million, or I'm wrong? What was it?
So the last funding round was around 55 million Series B, but 75 raised in total, yes.
Okay, so what are your next steps? What are your plans for the future?
I mean, at the moment, it's just coping with the demand. So we're actively hiring, we're building out the product, we're expanding geographically. We have an unbelievable demand in Latin America and across Europe, and our North American client base is growing. We are growing left to right in terms of product as well. One of the things we've recently launched is a sort of a fraud agent or a fraud ops person as a generative AI. We call him Finley. Mm-hmm. And so you can ask that questions 24/7. Why is this fraud? What happened to this user? And get instant feedback on everything from what rule is firing here to what compliance rules matter to what is the OFAC list and basic questions like that. Mm-hmm. So really, product roadmap is our absolute focus. And, at some point, we will eventually probably fundraise to continue fueling that growth. But right now, it's pedal to the metal on product growth and market expansion to cope with the demand. So it's a really nice problem to have. Everybody's heard of Sardine. The thing we're trying to fix at the moment is making sure everybody knows all of the things we can do, because we are a fraud and compliance stack, and I don't think there are many things that look like us. Historically, the market has had either incumbent legacy vendors that are 25 products in a trench coat designed to look like one product and platform, or you have orchestration platforms. Yeah. And what that does is it makes a Lego box where the 35 different products underneath it, you can put together inside of their Lego box, but you have to put the Lego together. Sardine's sort of halfway between the two. We are one API, but we're much more opinionated. We feel like one product. We go much deeper into some of the largest partners in the world. So we have a partnership with Refinitiv. We have a partnership with Experian. We have a partnership with Visa. We have partnerships with some of the largest data providers in the world. Early warning services in the United States is one of the largest consortia. Incredibly difficult for people to get access to from a fraud and compliance standpoint if you're in FinTech. But Sardine has that, and we've built a deep integration with it. So, our growth is about collecting more data, building out the product, pushing further into generative AI, and servicing the demand we have in front of us.
Impressive. Congratulations.
That's to join this team. It's an incredible team.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just grateful to be here, frankly. I learn so much on a daily basis. And that's why I joined. I needed to learn about this space, and the learning is off the charts. I've never seen a team that can ship so incredibly quickly. I've never been in a place where it's like, here's this crazy machine learning idea. What if we could do it? And the team is building it and shipping it in days. It's incredible.
Wow. Okay, Simon, to conclude my episodes, I always ask a book recommendation. So which book would you recommend us?
I've been trying to reread The Seven Powers lately. Seven Powers talk about defensible moats. They talk about sort of what are the powers of a business, and they will talk about things like network effects. They'll talk about deep IP and trying to understand what is it that you as a business have as a real unique selling point and unfair advantage, and then how do you play that from a strategy perspective? So that's what I'd recommend. It's heavy going. It's not an easy read, but it's also something where if you give it thought, it can really make a difference.
Thank you very much, Simon, and see you very soon.
See you soon.
Bye. Thank you all for listening and sharing this moment with us. Don't hesitate to contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn to share your comments and reactions. You can also rate this episode on your favorite podcast platform. See you soon.